far you have come on your own, but never alone. Through the rain and through the shine, here's your moment, it's your time. You stood tall and now you see, standing in your destiny. 100 women growing strong. 100 women where you belong. You stood tall and now you see, you have reached your destiny. Woman.
As people of African descent, we offer this land recognition in solidarity with the indigenous peoples of Turtle Island in the efforts and deliberate intentions toward decolonization. As people of African descent, we acknowledge the land of Turtle Island that sustains us, express deep gratitude to its indigenous peoples, and pledge to honor our dignity and divinity that ultimately connects us all. By Kay Johnson. Welcome to 100 ABC Fireside Chats. 100 Accomplished Black Canadian Women is a bold project initiated by co-authors and co-founders, the Honorable Dr. Jean Augustine, Dr. Denise O'Neill Green, and Donna Jones Simmons. Our mission is to celebrate and archive the professional accomplishments of trailblazing Black women from all across Canada. The goal is to create an ever-expanding database available for current and future generations via print media, public and private libraries, as well as our website, which is www.100abcwomen.ca. In addition to our fireside chats on topics that matter to our communities, such as education, healthcare, entertainment, creative arts, trade union, and so much more, we offer biennial book launching galas and biannual symposiums. The co-authors and co-founders would like to take this opportunity to thank each of you for attending today's fireside chat. We know that you will find these sessions educational and inspirational. So sit back, relax, and hear from our brilliant and talented honorees.
Welcome to Season 4, Episode 11 of 100 ABCs of Fireside Chat. Today's conversation is so relevant and timely. It is on environment and climate change. I think we have all experienced the effects of climate change, especially over the last several years, whether it's flooding, wildfires, increases in hurricanes, tornadoes, you name it. But today I'm excited to share that we have an amazing lineup of experts, speakers who are here to share some nuggets as well as things that we can do to help alleviate the effects of climate change. My name is Alethea O'Hara Stevenson, a 2024 honoree, and I will be your moderator for this session. Before I dive into introductions, I want to take a moment to recognize this episode's sponsors. We have Toronto Community Benefits Network, as well as ETFO, UBC Build, as well as a TD Ready commitment. Thank you for joining us and welcome everyone. I would like to take a moment to introduce each of our speakers today. Their bios are absolutely phenomenal, and I think it is important to share a little bit about who they are so that you have a sense of the expertise that they bring to the table. First, we have Diane Sullivan, who is a senior manager at TD Insurance, who was deeply involved in the company's response to the 2013 Calgary floods, 2016 Fort McMurray wildfire, and many devastating hailstorm and rainstorm events. This has given Diane a front row seat on the impact of climate change on people, communities, and businesses, and a recognition of the need for a whole society approach to effectively adapt to our new reality. Welcome, Diane. We also have another amazing leader, Marie Clark Walker. She's a dedicated mentor and a strong believer that social justice is essential to an equitable world. She was the first Black or racialized woman to serve as both Secretary Treasurer and Executive Vice President of the Canadian Labour Congress. She was also a 2018 ABC Woman honoree. Congratulations. Marie continues to participate and work on many issues that are important to workers and marginalized communities, including climate action, gender, workers and human rights, as well as ILO Convention 190 and International Convention on the Elimination of Violence and Harassment in the World of Work. As a member of the Federal Employment Equity Task Force, she was an instrumental member of the team, recommending major changes that will make the world more equitable for everyone. Marie continues to give back to her community, such as speaking on panels such as this one, as well as a member of the 100 ABC Evaluation and Selection Planning Committee. Welcome, Marie. Thank you for joining us. We also have another expert, Rosemary Powell. Rosemary is the Executive Director of the Toronto Community Benefits Network. In just 7 years, Rosemary positioned TCBN as a key systems intermediary to create pathways into construction for equity-deserving groups. Her work has helped to generate thousands of good jobs in construction and hundreds of thousands of dollars in social procurement for local and diverse businesses and social enterprises. Welcome to this episode of Fireside Chat on Climate and Environmental. Welcome, welcome. So this conversation is not only relevant, but it is timely. And I would love to dive into the conversation, touching on a topic that I think is near and dear to each and every one of us. And I'm going to segue right over to Diane and talking about insurance. And I'm going to ask you a 2-for-1 question, Diane, to put you in the hot seat right away. So given many homeowners, whether you're a tenant, whether you are an actual homeowner, what are some of the current and emerging challenges that individuals are facing as a result of climate change? And then the part 2 to that question is, what can individuals do to better understand and protect their investments?
Thank you, Alethea. You did warn me you were going to put me in the hot seat, and you also warned me to try and keep my answers to around 2 minutes. So I think I'm already eating up that time, and there's so much to be said about this. So anyone who is denying that climate change is real is living in a fantasy world these days. It has been real for a long time, and we are in fact at a very critical inflection point. And I'm pretty sure that there's no one on this call who's taking that. If you are, I suggest you go back and read the science, or give me a call and I'll do my best to set you straight. There's such a wide range of potential impacts around the rising temperatures and climate and climate change, weather patterns. They're extraordinarily complex and, in fact, well beyond my understanding of the world. I was never great at science and physics and so on. However, at a community level and at an individual level, we're seeing it. We're seeing, where there were always disastrous events that would happen and would affect the insurance industry. And around 2010, if you look at the graphs, it's kind of like up and down, like there's the ice storm, things like that. And then at 2010, it's a hockey stick graph, right? There are many more events, and the events are more serious, and they're also very, very broad, because you have, the kind of the bread and butter of insurance, which are wildfires and fires in general, right? But we're building bigger and bigger communities and encroaching more and more on the wildland urban interface. And with that, we've forgotten in some ways how to build smart in those environments. There's increased and more severe hot and cold, right? So we get things like ice storms or deep freezing events. I don't know if anyone on the call has had their pipes frozen and burst, right? It's not pretty when it melts. Um, right? And likewise, we have both summer and winter storms, which are getting more and more severe. How you as an individual are affected by it is very much based on where you live and how you live, right? So, but no one is immune to it. If you're a tenant living in a basement suite, which is very common in Toronto, where I'm based, you're vulnerable. Anytime there's a heavy rainstorm in certain communities in Toronto, you're going to get water in your basement, right? Whether it's from the municipal sewer system or coming in through the foundations. So I'm just giving you a very high level summary. In terms, did you also ask, Althea, what people can do
Yeah,
to
absolutely.
protect
What
themselves? Yeah, and again, there's so much, and there's so much to be done, but there are very simple things that we as individuals can do, regardless of where we live or whether we're renters or owners or whatever. And the first thing is be aware of what risks you're exposed to. Living in Toronto, I don't worry about hailstorms, right? People in Calgary, you should be, right? Like, and similarly, I don't have a waterfront property, so I don't worry a lot about flooding from a river or a lakefront. I do worry about heavy rainfall and the aging infrastructure of my city, causing my neighbors and everyone's sewage to back up into my basement, or my 100-plus-year-old home finally deciding that the foundations have had enough and water starting to come in that way. So first is understanding where your risk lies, and then taking some very simple approaches. Like, if you know you're going to get hail, don't leave your barbecue out in the middle of your backyard. Your $20,000 Weber extravaganza. It's going to get hit. Right? Similarly, like me, where I know my basement is probably the most vulnerable part of my home, I don't keep precious things down there. And I try and keep things off the floor or in plastic bins, or it's stuff that it's like, okay, I can let it go. you know, um, if living in a detached home, and you have property around you, it's really, really simple to give the water somewhere else to go. Don't pave your lawn, plant it. And not only is that good for the community, your health, and climate change in general, it's also good to protect you from the impacts.
I love that. Well said. And I think, you've shared some nuggets, and I want to pivot. I'm going to put Rosemary in the hot seat. This was unplanned, but I think given some of the context that you have shared, Rosemary, I think you can potentially opine on some of the industry trends, right? So from a construction perspective, how have you seen the industry respond to the evolving weather changes that we're all experiencing, specifically whether it's from a homeowner's perspective, building homes, organizations, infrastructure, you name it. How can you share some of your perspectives from the changes that we have seen and how the industry has responded?
Well, thank you, Alethea. And yeah, for everything that Diane has said, climate change is definitely real and it impacts us very directly. And it's about getting out front of it. And definitely the industry is responding and is looking at how to perform work that is going to really focus on building emissions and other types of sources of emissions and how we reduce them. Specifically talking about construction, there are policies and regulations right here in Toronto that are even coming to play right now, like the Building Emission Performance Standards, that is not going to look just at new builds, but also looking at retrofitting all of those old buildings that we now live in and that are not designed for today's climate. And our coalition, we see climate action such as retrofits and building green infrastructure as opportunities to create jobs for underrepresented groups and improve social equity, improve public health outcomes, and create other environmental benefits for the community. What we want to see is that people are being trained up to understand the impacts of climate change and the kinds of building, practices and trades practices that can be put in place to help reduce carbon emissions and to retrofit these buildings. Like, for example, there's a big push towards, heat pumps, right? So kind of, getting off fossil fuels and looking at alternative sources and renewable energy to fuel, your home. And it's something that is going to be required very soon because the city, like I said, is implementing building emission performance standards. It's still going through a process of evaluation and review and broad public consultation, making sure that the industry has all the information they need, can give the desired level of input to make sure that there is no, that first of all, that everybody is aware, they've been able to provide input, look at the positives, look at the negatives, what are some of the challenges that we may experience on a sector by sector level, whether it's be for residents of these buildings, whether it's for the developers, whether it's for the workers. And so, going through that very, very conscious process of reviewing the proposed regulations in fall of 2025, we will be seeing new regulations come in place to report building emission, the emissions coming from your building. And there will be a process for looking at, okay, and now how do you reduce that over time? And for those buildings who do not reduce their emissions, there's going to be some consequences. There's going to be requirements for paying some fees that will help to then go back into the whole system to help develop programs to be able to reinforce the city's climate reduction strategy. So we at the Toronto Community Benefits Network, we're making sure that we're focusing and educating new workers in environmental stewardship, which will help to build their capacity to be able to work in this industry. Because what generally happens, we find, is that when big new policy changes happen, and as we're moving into this green economy, people who have been underrepresented in the construction industry for many, many, many years, if they're not trained up and skilled up to be able to have these kinds of expertise, they're also going to be left behind. And so that's definitely one of the major focus that our coalition is working on.
Brilliant. I love that. And I'm curious, the building emissions performance standards that you mentioned, is that an Ontario-based thing or it's on a national scale?
So this is the city of Toronto that's implementing the building emission performance standards, but we're also seeing, so Vancouver has already implemented, Quebec is looking at implementing building emission performance standards. This is something that we're looking at how it's worked in other jurisdictions, including in North America, and really the industry and our governments are moving towards this at a national level. And I mean, I know that, you know, as we experience, you know, the setbacks, you know, across the border, there is less of a focus on these issues. But I mean, at the end of the day, again, like Diane said, we can deny it all we want, but our homes are being flooded. We see fires, you know, happening. The climate is changing, and we're going to have to address it one way or the other. So every municipality has it in their best interest to actually implement similar measures.
I love that. That's beautiful. And I love how we touched on from the individual level to what the industry is doing to respond to climate change. But now, you know, you touched on equity a little bit, and I want to segue over to Marie, because I know that with the work that you have been doing in the community from an equity lens, this is something that is near and dear to your heart. So how can you share with us how the impacts of climate change on specifically to women and girls?
Thank you, Alethea. I just want to 100% agree with everything Rosemary and Diane has said. We know that climate change definitely exists, but it also amplifies and deepens the existing inequalities that we see. Black, racialized, Indigenous women and girls, especially those living in low income and rural settings, often face the greatest risks, and they bear the brunt of climate change in many, many ways. They face environmental racism. Many Indigenous and racialized communities are situated near polluting industries, landfills, flood prone zones, often resulting from or as a result of discriminatory planning or not understanding how to plan properly. For example, when you look at Indigenous communities, you hear all the time that a lot of the Indigenous communities have unsafe drinking water or inadequate housing conditions. All of this is made worse by climate events. I mean, we can go all the way back to Nova Scotia and Africville, and you know the causes of that. People might not have thought that climate had anything to do with it, but it was around environmental racism and the way in which cities are planned, who is living in particular areas. Diane talked about housing and flooding, and housing and displacement is also important. A lot of those climate-driven disasters like wildfires, like floods, disproportionately affect low-income and racialized renters, many of whom are women-led. And we talk about houses, but today we're seeing apartment buildings, not ground floors, not lower floors, higher floors also being affected by floods because of the hot and cold, hot and cold, hot and cold. You find that the caulking is drying up or not there. So when we have heavy rains like we had the other day, and still happening outside, constant rain, you're seeing higher floors getting flooded. And again, a lot of the women that are in these positions, a lot of the people that are in these positions are also the least able to relocate because they don't have the funds. It also has an impact on your health, right? Black and Indigenous women are already face systemic barriers when it comes to healthcare and proper healthcare. All climate change does is intensify this. It increases respiratory illnesses, food insecurity. Again, Diane can talk about what those flooding causes for crops and what extreme heat and extreme cold does for crops. And then we also have the impact of mental stress, right? Especially for those who are currently living in substandard housing or remote regions. Displacement and resource scarcity can also heighten the risk of violence and harassment and exploitation, which also leads to an increase in gender-based violence. And finally, economic insecurity. Racialized and Indigenous women are overrepresented in precarious jobs, caregiving, food services, gig work. And so those jobs limit the amount of, first of all, the job security, as well as the amount of leave, whether it's sick leave, compassionate leave, so they don't get that. So it's more difficult for them to take off. And when they have to, because of a climate event, they're not getting paid for it. So this also makes them very, very vulnerable when climate disasters happen. It disrupts their transit, it disrupts power, it disrupts infrastructure. And they also, because of that precarity, have less access to land, to credit, and climate resilient technology, which makes it really, really hard to adapt to the changing conditions that we're seeing right now.
Wow, you've touched on so many nuggets, Marie, and I'm going to put you back in the hot seat again because I want to dive into, the importance and why is gender equality essential to effective climate action. And then I'd also invite Diane and Rosemary to opine on this as well, because I think you can marry this response with some of the specific industry impacts. So I'll start with you, Marie, and then perhaps Diane and Rosemary can chime in as well.
Thank you. Gender equality ensures that all the solutions that whether they are, housing solutions or climate solutions, make sure that they're inclusive, just, and effective for everybody. Diverse leadership improves outcomes, and we found there's studies, there's our lived experience. When women lead or participate in decision making, whether it's local environmental committees or international climate negotiations, policies tend to be a lot more equitable and a lot more sustainable. We are the holders of knowledge, of local knowledge. We, particularly Indigenous, rural women, often possess the ecological and agricultural knowledge that drives adaptation and resilience. They bring essential land-based knowledge, community-rooted strategies. We are storytellers. We know the history, but they're often excluded from the formal spaces, the formal decision-making spaces. Equity also focused climate planning also needs to center our voices and our leadership. It's not difficult, as women are already leading informal networks of care, mutual aid, and emergency. Whenever anything happens in community, who's the first person you call, right? The women in the community. When someone isn't well, we are there. We're quick to provide food, to provide care, to provide assistance and air. And so we are the ones that are there. We make sure our children are taken care of. And as our networks jump into action, we also have financial ways of assisting. We talked on a previous fireside chat about the importance of partner, box, susu. Diana, that's the savings that we share with each other so that we can use that money for emergency situations. So we, as women, are already doing all of this for in our communities. So we are well placed to participate in all of those strategies at the decision-making tables. Equitable investments are also very important. Gender responsive climate funding ensures that both women and men's needs are addressed, and it improves the reach and the impact of the strategies that are there that allow you to adapt. Gender equality also ensures that climate adaptation and mitigation policies such as green jobs, training, energy retrofits that Rosemary talked about, and disaster planning benefits everybody, not just a few. And we look at benefiting those that are most at risk. I think empowering women and promoting gender equality is not only human rights, but it's imperative to also a smart climate strategy, which is definitely needed.
I want to
Really.
jump in.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, so I love what Marie Clark has said. You know, when there is a disaster, who do you call? You call the women in your community. They're the
That's right.
leaders. They're going to organize things. They're going to make things happen. The challenge that we've seen though in the construction industry, and whenever I kind of intervene, I'm always going to be talking about work and the right to work, is that if you call women in a circumstance where you know your basement is flooded, um, if you call you know for help, you're most likely going to get a man
Man.
because right within the construction industry, what you see is that there is such a low participation of women working in that industry. When we started our organization 10 years ago, I believe the number was 2% of women who worked in the skilled trades. When you work in the skilled trades, that's something where you're mastering a skill that is transferable, that you can use it at home, at work, in the community, wherever, right? That's your empowerment to be able to really be able to contribute to, to being there in a real way, in an emergency. Yes, the traditional role that women play in in being the caregivers for our community really needs to be extended to the workplace. And so what we're trying to do as we're developing our work through community benefits is to make sure that we're pushing for more women to get into construction roles. We want them to be the plumbers, we want them to be the carpenters and the electricians and so forth, so that when you call for help, women will be a part of that mix. And not only that, especially nowadays with, construction and construction work has always been expensive. Try to call a plumber to come to your place. As a single mother that rents somewhere or may own your home or whatever, you have to rely on these kind of expensive services to get anything in your home done, repaired properly. Imagine if you're able to do that on your own because you have those skills
Right.
as a woman, right? So this is something that also helps with economic empowerment of a woman to be able to do for herself and to do for her family and to do for her community. So having an industry that is so exclusive and that leaves out such incredible, amazing talent is really, really something that needs to change. And right now we're seeing 4% of women, and we know that in the workforce and in society in general, I'm sorry, but there's at least 50% women, maybe even 51
More.
or more.
More.
So that's a huge discrepancy that really needs to be addressed.
If I could always also, sorry, Alethea,
That's okay.
Jump right back in. It's also why it's important not to look at climate change or environmental racism in a silo. It's connected to everything else. I'm thinking about in Ontario, the passage of Bill 5, and everybody thinks about Bill 5. So if you don't know what Bill 5 is, it is the, what's it called? Special Economic Zones Act. And again, you don't think about that in terms of climate change, in terms of environmental racism, in terms of workers, but it has everything to do with all of that. This act, you need to read legislation carefully and ensure that you understand what it impacts. This particular piece of legislation is in third reading in Ontario, and what it does, it takes away a number of your rights. The right to understand what's going on, because the government now doesn't have to give advance notice. They don't have to consult. Prior to this, they had to consult if you were building things in green spaces, if you were building things on Indigenous land. They had to do archaeological digs and look at the history of the space to ensure that there wasn't any kind of Indigenous burial ground or a Black burial ground, or the impact that it would have on other cultures. This bill says they don't have to do that anymore, and it has a significant impact. You look at the, and I know I may be going a little bit off topic, but it's connected. You look at the incidents of seeing coyotes, fox, all of those things in the urban areas, it's because they are building on green spaces and we're losing our green spaces and their habitat. And so it's all connected, and we need to start looking at things holistically instead of in silos.
I think that's such a brilliant point, Marie and Rosemary. Your comments completely on point. And as kind of the person working for a big five bank in the room, I I feel the weight of it all because we we operate and insurance operates within this whole context, and it's important and that we see ourselves and that the industry sees itself catering to all our constituents, all the entirety of the communities we serve, not just specific silos. And I have seen insurers starting to target certain groups like and financial services industry as well, newcomers, maybe people on limited income. So giving them, like, offering an insurance package that isn't as expensive. It has less coverage. It isn't as expensive, but it takes the bite off, because one of the realities that we see in these big climate events is that, people most adversely affected are poorer, more female, right? More kids, right? People who are making decisions, do I buy insurance or do I pay the electricity bill, or God forbid, buy some fresh fruit and vegetables? Like, life has gotten very tough. But these events are going to keep happening. And I have seen in, the 15 years or so I've been operating in this space, some movement on the part of both government and insurers and the larger community to stare down the reality and start to try and understand how are we going to balance the need to take care of people versus the need to be able to afford it, right? Although I think affordability becomes like a blanket statement that people who don't actually want to do the right things use as an excuse. Sorry, ranting a little bit there. But it really does become an interaction. And as Marie, you were saying, getting the diverse voices at the table so the needs are understood before they're a need, and have that commitment that what, just because you're a single mom renter kind of at this stage of your life struggling to make ends meet, doesn't mean that when Toronto gets 200 millimeters of rain in an hour that you just lose everything.
Yeah, and you've touched on so many nuggets, and who wants to be in a position where you have to decide if you're going to put food on your table versus, paying for an insurance policy? Both are equally important, but when you're facing those situations, how do you choose? Which one do you choose, right? Caring for your family. And I think that ties into some of the unique challenges that women and girls in Indigenous communities face. And segueing from some of the comments that you were making, Marie, earlier, when you're talking about some of the disproportionate impacts to women and girls, when you talked about the fact that many of the gig workers are disproportionately impacted, women are impacted because they're trying to get to work, but they're usually in compromised neighborhoods or housing situations. And so these are some of the diverse and fresh perspectives that we often overlook when we think about climate, but it directly impacts so many of us who are essential to our economy. So now, with all of that being said, Rosemary, you touched on some of the things from an industry perspective that you're doing around educating and empowering individuals. From an education perspective, can you dive into that a little bit deeper for me? And I also want to touch on what can we do to make the trades more exciting for young women and girls in particular, putting the umbrella of climate change and making it relatable to them to understand the direct impact. But how do we make it more attractive and exciting so we have more women empowered to take up the craft?
Yes, that's a beautiful question. And what we're seeing in our network is that, yes, women are quite capable and of working in construction, whether it be in a construction trade or a professional administrative and technical jobs, to be the planners and the architects and the designers, because we think differently, and we don't just think about the building, we think about the people who have to live in them. We think about the animals, we think about, the green infrastructure all around us. We think about beauty and in a holistic way. And that's how we see the women in our network just really rising up and becoming leaders within their unions as we are getting out there and recruiting and turning their heads to the concept that, yes, a career in construction is absolutely for you. We're just seeing incredible leadership from women, and we want to facilitate more of that. And, by linking climate action with social justice efforts, this is how we solve for some of those inequalities that we see. Having a woman's voice at the table, and people from equity deserving groups who are oftentimes the least consulted about things that are going to impact them the most, right? So what we use is a process of negotiating community benefits agreements into major infrastructure projects. Government is investing a ton of money of our taxpayer dollars in building infrastructure. And now, again, with the economic situation that we're in, with the tensions between Canada and the US and tariffs right now, our governments, like Marie Clark said, are pushing for policies that will reduce the requirements and the time limits for environmental consultation and so forth. For women, we know that these things matter. And it's important that our voice is at the table. And that's why we use community benefits as an agreement as a process to disrupt the status quo. We want to make sure that, when these policies are being introduced, when these buildings are being proposed to be built, that we make our people, our community, our women, knowledgeable about what's happening and what's at stake, and really provide them with the tools to be able to intervene in those circumstances at the city level, at the provincial level, and at the federal level. And so, community, neighborhood and environmental improvements is one of the 5 tenets that we focus on in our work on community benefits. Yes, we want to see the apprenticeships while the project is being built. And yes, those are the floorers and the roofers and the carpenters and the electricians and the plumbers and the sheet metal workers and the HVACs and whatever. We need to see more women getting into those roles, and they're darn good at it. I can't wait for you to meet, some of them. We're having our Building Diversity Awards, and the industry is coming together this Thursday to really celebrate our accomplishments. And you'll see women at the very forefront of all of this. We have a bunch of young women who are, they had the Black History Month celebration at the Carpenters Union the other day. And number one, what was so beautiful was the room was packed with just Black workers in construction and who are carpenters. I mean, that was nice. But the additional thing that I saw was that about 50% of them were women, right, Marie Clark? You were one of our you were one of our powerful speakers in that room. And, makes me cry, it makes me tear up. So we just need to see, kind of more of that happening. And so to be able to provide the tools, the resources, the information that women can take and that they can act. They know when those deputations are happening. They'll know when those policies are coming. They know when to, they need to get in there and, get a petition out into their communities. they, they have to be prepared for that, and also themselves building their skills so they can take on these works. And our union partners, I have to say, that they understand this. Change takes time. It's not going to happen overnight. They've been operating this way for 150 years. But our network is able to be supported and strengthened and to exist really because of the support and the allyship that we've had with our labor allies, whether it be the Toronto and York Region Labor Council, the Ontario Federation of Labor, the Canadian, the CFL, I'm saying OFL, CFL, whatever.
CLC. CLC.
CLC, thank you. They've always been there in the construction unions, but we need to see the unions open up to be able to recruit more, Black and racialized people, Indigenous peoples, newcomers into their ranks, but also more women. It's a real issue that, there's always this tension that we're all trying to come together to address. Yeah, we need to make sure that, we see good jobs and equity hiring and even social procurement. That's another area that I want to touch on. So we collaborate with the Afro-Canadian Contractors Association, and there's a lot of women now who are owning their own business and saying, you know what, I have skills, industry ain't hiring me, or focused on, I'm going to create. And not only am I going to create, I'm also going to hire people, from my community to help me build my business. And they need contract opportunities on these major infrastructure projects and these, climate based, type of contracts that come up too. So they also need the capacity building around how to run a green business. And so that's also one of the things that I'm focused on is, how to make sure that we're building those skills in our communities to be able to effectively compete in this new green economy. Because if our Black businesses, minority businesses, don't, build their capacity now, they certainly are going to be left behind.
Well said. And I love the fact that you're so engaged and involved in empowering so many women. And thank you, Marie, for your role in speaking to all of those accomplished women. Before we get into solutions, I want to remind the audience that this is an opportunity as well for you to ask your questions to all of these expert leaders. But before we go to solutions, Marie, I want to go back to you for a moment because we talked about from an equity perspective. And I think we left out a very important segment, right, which is our elders and the keepers of all of our knowledge. And so can you share with us how older individuals are affected by the climate crisis and what role can they play in climate activism?
So before I go to that whole thing, one of the things that I want to support Rosemary and women in the trades on is just that. One of the things that our seniors, our parents and grandparents need to do, particularly from our communities, is talk about the trade as being a viable career. Oftentimes, from our perspective, you hear parents and grandparents that want lawyers and doctors and teachers and nurses, etc., all great professions. But the trades are it's the only place where you get your actual wage that is a living wage from day one, right? And so we also have a role to play in ensuring that we push our women and girls in that direction. And then when we're doing that, again, ensure that they're learning in a holistic way to see all the things that the trades do that can benefit climate change, that can benefit environmental justice, etc. And yes, when we're talking about the importance of climate justice, yes, we need to look at seniors. So our seniors are dealing with a whole set of health vulnerabilities. We are seeing older adults, particularly those in racialized and low income communities, being more vulnerable to extreme heat, poor air quality, and that poor air quality is caused by all kinds of things, including those big Amazon warehouses and data warehouses that are going up that people haven't even thought about the health impacts. The air quality, air pollution, and the health impacts of disasters like wildfires that are obviously, we've talked about it, Diane mentioned, that made worse because there's aging infrastructure and limited access to services, which will always exacerbate their pre-existing conditions or the mobility challenges that they have. A lot of seniors are also dealing with issues of isolation. Many older people, because they're isolated, there is a limited access to emergency information or assistance when these climate events, whether it's flooding or fires, et cetera, are taking place. During flooding, wildfires that we're seeing more of, loss of homes and livelihoods are also a serious issue. All of our seniors are on fixed incomes or pensions, and it might not cover the costs of the climate related damage or the improvements that they need to do, or the subsidies or the heat pumps and other things that we need to switch over to, which leaves them exposed on a number of levels, right? Also financially exposed. But they also can, as you said, Alethea, are keepers of knowledge, right? They have a role to play in activism. Their wisdom, their experience, they hold that generational knowledge about the local ecosystems, the sustainable practices that can also inform the practices and the strategies going forward. They also offer vital insights into land stewardship, who has owned the land, what has been on the land, the seasonal patterns of the land, and the resilience practices that have been utilized in the past. They provide advocacy and mentorship. Older persons can be powerful advocates for climate justice. They bridge the generations and the climate movements and often mentor younger activists. They mobilize local networks because they're around to have, those conversations with parents who are taking their children to school, the stay-at-home parents, the working parents. They're there. They are also there because of their institutional knowledge to hold those institutions accountable. They ensure that climate change is rooted in community history and lived experience. In terms of older Black and racialized activists, they have a long legacy of resistance, from environmental justice to civil rights. And all of that is inclusive of the work that they have all done on racism and discrimination. And in doing that, they foster intergenerational solidarity, which helps to mobilize climate action amongst all of us. Their experiences definitely help to connect climate justice to the broader struggles for liberation and equity and everything else that I was talking about in order to make this a holistic form of activism.
Brilliant, brilliant. And, I want to segue back into what you talked about, our community, often pushing our young people into specific roles, whether it be lawyer or being a doctor. But there are so many opportunities in the skilled trades as well. And this is one of the reasons why I think this conversation is not only timely, but relevant, because seeing leaders like yourselves speaking so passionately about the trades, having experience working with individuals, and having experienced it yourselves, right? To be able to talk about the skilled trades is another avenue of empowering our young people. Seeing is believing, right? And so this forum, I think, is absolutely powerful, and hopefully our young people will review this video over and over again and share it with their network. And for those adults who are watching, make sure that you're sharing it with your young people to empower them and let them know that there is an opportunity here in the skilled trades for them to consider as well. Now, I know we are coming close to time, but I don't want to leave without talking about some solutions. And Diane, I'm going to put you in the hot seat, and then I'll come back to Rosemary and Marie after. But what are some of the solutions that we can put in place, whether it's from an insurance perspective? What are some of the things that insurance companies can do to support community resilience and recovery, in particular after climate disasters?
That's a great question, and it's one insurers are struggling with and working through. And what uh, there's a few threads. The first is many insurers are offering additional coverage to rebuild stronger, right? So just as your vulnerability may increase the cost of your insurance, pardon the cat, be grateful there's no dog at home right now. um, just as it can increase the cost of insurance or the availability of it, but coming up along behind that, insurers are also looking for ways to help customers rebuild better, both in reducing kind of the pace of climate change by incenting them for more eco-friendly rebuild options, but also more resilient rebuild. And we've seen kind of very local initiatives in response to, say, hail in Calgary, to instead of putting those asphalt shingles that are going to be destroyed in the next 10 years from a hailstorm, although they have a 30-year lifespan, do impact resistant shingles and so on. But then there's also a lot of individual efforts that can be done in terms of both educating yourself and holding kind of the politicians and the decision makers accountable. And I think the work that Rosemary and Marie have been talking about is so impactful. It's like, don't let yourselves be silent, and partner with people who are raising up the voices that aren't at Doug Ford's table, and so that we're getting better decisions and better buy-in, because some of these decisions and these kind of improvements that something like Bill 5 is going to introduce has a very narrow time frame of impact and a very narrow group of people who benefit from it, right? So we need to broaden that conversation. It's not that we need to solve for May 2025. We need to solve for May 2125, because I'm hoping that some of my descendants will be alive then. And insurers are part of that, both in terms of kind of slowing the pace, building for the future, and then also helping individuals kind of today or tomorrow when disaster strikes. But we're always looking and pushing for ourselves to do more.
Amazing. Well said. Rosemary, over to you with a similar theme. What strategies can Toronto adopt to ensure equity-seeking communities are not only protected, but also benefit from building retrofits and any other solutions in place?
Excuse me if I say building community power. Community, community, community. Okay. The building emission performance standards, it's coming to City Hall, and there is a lot of pushback against it from those powers that may be. We want to see something meaningful that is going to be respectful of the needs of people from equity deserving groups, that is going to be beneficial, and that the industry is going to buy in as well, right? And so we need to make sure that we are building community power to have the knowledge, understand the timelines, understand what's involved, what's at stake. We want to make sure that we're building their capacity to be able to participate in these conversations that are happening. Mm-hmm. There is a unity consult that the City of Toronto has. They're getting out there and they're getting feedback. They're getting a lot of feedback. Is it the feedback from the voices who matter most, the voices who will be impacted the most by it? Is it the voices of people who are ready to support this and ready to roll up their sleeves to make it happen? Or is it going to be the naysayers that are going to say, too much administrative burden, or, right? Who is it that the city's ears are kind of attuned to, right? Let's make sure that we take up our agency as residents in the city to be able to intervene into those conversations. And so, what I would encourage people to do is to learn more about it. I could share a resource from TAF, the Toronto Atmospheric Fund, that is going through, that's developing a communications strategy. And they have a website now that people can learn and understand more about it and understand the timelines for how they can participate. For us as a community also, we want to build our capacity to be able to take on the opportunities that are going to come from this. It's not, always, we have to make sure we understand the challenges, absolutely. Mm-hmm. But there are so many opportunities in this as well, because this is a new industry that is really being created, and we need our minority-owned contractors to be able to build the skills to be able to perform those work, the retrofit work, the energy upgrades, the installing HVACs, insulating windows and doors and attics and all of this kind of stuff. We need to be able to have the capabilities within our communities to be able to benefit from the economic opportunities that are going to be generated from all of this. But if we don't know, you don't know what you don't know. And so it's our job to make sure we get that message out into the community as broad and wide as possible and provide them with the tools to be able to intervene.
Well said. Community, community, community. And Marie, what strategies or solutions can we implement?
Oh, there's so many. Promote inclusive government or governance. Get involved. I put the Climate Action Network website in the chat. Participate. Join a Climate Action Network near you. Participate in Earth Day with your kids and grandkids. Plant a tree. Teach them, start to talk to them about the importance of, farming and nurturing the land. Join an existing network, lobby government at all levels for changes. One of the things that I didn't touch on, if I could touch on it really quickly, this is not just a Toronto or an Ontario issue. This is the entire country. And when we talk about making changes, we also need to understand what just transitioning is. So we talk about the what's happening in Alberta with the oil fields, oil sands, etc. Those jobs are important, but you can use those same workers to transition into something that is greener, right? And so we have to be doing a lot more around education around what just transition is, what it looks like in your community and for you. And as I said, I cannot stress enough, make sure we lobby governments at all levels around things that will help us, and make sure that, as Diane said, we have future generations, because the way that we're going now, I'm worried. I'm very scared that my grandbabies won't get to see my age. So it's all of our responsibility. So let's work together to make sure that we do have a lot of our generations in 21-25.
Amazing, amazing. Well said. What a power-packed session. Thank you so much, each of you, Diane, Rosemary, and Marie Clark, for sharing your knowledge, your wisdom, your expertise with each and every one of us today. So many nuggets. I think the most important takeaway for me is simply to be involved. Don't sit on the sidelines, whether it's, participating in Earth Day, getting involved in taking up the trades, and, asking your insurance provider, the things that are important to you and your community to protect your home. The point is to be involved and engaged. So thank you for spending the afternoon with us. This has been very exciting and informative fireside chat on environment and climate action. A special thank you to 100 ABC Women for organizing these events. And a special thank you once again to our sponsors, ETFO, UBC Built, TD Ready Commit, and of course, Toronto Community Benefits Network. Thank you for tuning in. Again, my name is Alethea O'Hara Stevenson, 2024 honoree. And on behalf of each of our panelists again, Diane Sullivan, Rosemary Powell, Marie Clark Walker, thank you. It has been a pleasure.
Look how far you have come on your own, but never alone. Through the rain and through the shine,